David Cage games are notoriously overdramatic to the point of silliness.
Jason!
However, these games definitely aren't bad by any means at all. Quantic Dream does a surprisingly good job, even better than Telltale, at making every single decision you make have meaning. In Detroit Become Human, this could not be more evident. The game takes drastic paths depending on the decisions you make. In Kara's story, you have to decide between doing immoral things for the safety of a lovable little girl. In Marcus's story, you have to choose the best choice of action as a new leader of an android revolution, deciding to either be pacifist or straight up tyrannical. Connor's story, however, is by far the best, as many people seem to agree. Much of this can be contributed to Brian Deckard and Clancy Brown's performances as Connor and Hank respectively. However, the idea of a buddy cop noir story with the other half having a constant existential crisis and the latter half constantly hating himself for something that happened years ago is really interesting. In Connor's story, you have to decide between making moral and human choices while also sacrificing the mission and more important objectives at hand. This video is going to talk about what makes Connor the best character in Detroit Become Human. Like most Telltale-styled games, the first chapter is more or less a tutorial level, giving you easy choices to make, but also having some tough decisions to get the idea through the player's head that your choices have impact. But Detroit starts with a Connor mission, and at the end of the chapter, depending on your ending, your software's instability will increase or decrease. Connor's the only character in the game to have a software instability, but why? In the first chapter of Kara and Marcus, they both break through their programming and become free after being presented with situations which involve harm or the possibility of harm to someone that means a lot to them. For Kara, it's Alice's abusive father Todd almost harming Alice. For Marcus, it's Carl's son lashing out and threatening his father. But Connor is a more advanced model with little to no probability of breaking through his programming, and Connor is even programmed with a digital conscience called Amanda with the purpose of reminding Connor that he is a machine who needs to complete his mission. Connor also doesn't have a reason to care about any of the people or deviants involved in his cases, because he just needs to complete his mission. That's why, if the girl dies in the hostage, if you leave Hank hanging in the nest, Connor's software instability will decrease as the value of human life becomes less valuable. This will make Connor more machine-like and the mission will become more of a top priority. This makes Connor's decisions have a more lasting and important impact. While playing as Connor, you have to juggle a couple of things at once while playing. Your relationship with Hank, the success of your mission to progress the investigation in Hank's relationship, and your own morals. Many of these come at a conflict many times, with a couple of notable moments being hanging off the building in the nest, killing the Chloe to get intel, or leaving her alive and meet Kamsky, and leaving the Lesbian Eden Club models alive or killing them to progress the investigation in the Eden Club. These are pivotal moments in Connor's story, and they all define him as either machine or human. For Connor, there's no gray area. At the climax of Connor and Marcus's chapter, Crossroads, you are forced with Connor's existential climax, and you are faced with Connor making the ultimate decision. Defy the trust of Amanda, the public, and the authorities, or defy the trust of Marcus and Jericho, ultimately ruining the lives of hundreds of deviants who just want to be free. However, depending on your gameplay, you don't have the option to become deviant. Through making moral decisions throughout the entire game, Marcus can breach Connor and finally make Connor realize that he does care about human life and that he does have an active human conscience with human morals. If you don't decide to make moral choices and you play through Connor's story with the full intention of just accomplishing the mission, you will not get the chance to become deviant. This is a very interesting concept because the developers behind Detroit know that, especially if you've been playing video games for a long time previously to playing Detroit, you will have the top priority in your head that you want to accomplish the mission. The developers use this against you and face you with many life or death situations involving the completion or failure of the mission. Of course, if you know how video games work, you know that the story progresses eventually, but the decision comes down to, should you complete the mission, or should you make the moral decision and save lives, but also at the cost of the mission? Connor's feelings are also reflected in the player in the sense that, yes, they want to complete the mission, it's their job, it's what they want to do as a player of a video game, but they also have to make the right choice and make a moral decision. The best example of this is probably in The Nest when Hank is hanging off the building. I am going to make a lot of references to that specific mission. By chasing Rupert, you can just end it all there. You can complete your mission and move on with your day. But at this point, you've already had a growing relationship with Hank, and throughout The Nest, it has progressed even more positively. So at the climax of The Nest, you're faced with a very difficult decision. Do you save Hank, or do you leave him hanging to chase Rupert? It's a very conflicting decision, and this is also reflected in Connor depending on the choice you take. This may just pertain to me, but I personally believe that the music in the game plays a very big part in Connor's character. Composer Nima Fakara is a very flexible composer who is very creative and inventive in his approaches to making music. Fakara said that he wanted Connor's theme to sound very mechanic, metallic, robotic, and calculated, to go with the theme of Connor's character. Fakara built an entire instrument for this theme. He used unplugged electric violins, a mini Moog Voyager for the main motif, and a wide range of instruments for the, as he describes it, of the score. The music sounds very analog, and there's a lot of staccato in the unplugged electric violins and the synthesizers to describe Connor as calculated and precise. There are little pulses in the background throughout, which are like the pulses from the Dark Knight score, and I think this is supposed to add to the noir element of Connor's character, as he is an android detective. This also again makes Connor seem very focused and calculated, and the use of the 8th and 16th note rhythm as Connor's main motif can be interpreted like the inner workings of a machine. It's complicated, but also very consistent and calculated. Many people also seem to agree that Connor's motif is used widely very well, and you know shit is about to go down when you hear that theme. I also want to talk about the track Now, which is the chase music. This theme sounds like it could come directly from an action movie. The entire song gives me goosebumps, from the huge focus on the drums in the back to the climax of the song with the focus being the unplugged violin, quartet, and horns. The main part of the song that always gives me goosebumps is probably the part where the horns have the melody. The horns are loud, threatening, all while the rhythm is pounding away and the unplugged strings are quietly playing the main Connor motif. Obviously, the other composers are incredibly talented and they very much so know what they're doing. But because of Fakara's talent for seeing music and everything, using weird sounds to complete a track, and putting full emphasis on his initial motif, his tracks are just more memorable because they have a selected style and path that they follow which define Connor as a character. I know I just went on a huge musical analysis which may seem insignificant to the purpose of this video. However, the music plays a huge role in Connor's story and is a large factor in making him the most likable character in Detroit. Music is an integral part of a character which defines them in their journey. For good examples of this, look at the Batman Arkham City theme, Look at the Soviet connection from GTA 4. Look at literally every song from Metal Gear Solid 5. And deviating from the video game themes, check out the song that plays when Jack Nicholson is about to kill his wife in The Shining.
Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in.
All of these songs are unique to their respective games and describe the characters and their journeys ahead. Connor's theme is no different, and I believe every track in his story is completely unique to him and does a great job at describing an android looking for an identity. Now, this section is going to focus entirely on Hank, but also more specifically the chemistry Hank and Connor share throughout the story. Hank is a respectable, yet also bitter and grumpy old police lieutenant who hates androids, as he blames them for taking his son after android surgeons failed to save his son's life following a fatal car crash.
Little Cole had just turned 6.
Shut up! Don't you talk about my son!
Hank is also evidently depressed and has a drinking problem, as he's reluctant to move past his son's death and accept his life the way it is. Hank is a nihilist, and he's quite evidently a hopeless, lost, and suicidal man who's lost all respect for himself, his job, his boss, his community, and his living situation. Hank also has a very strong self-hatred, as he believes it's his own fault for trusting in androids and possibly causing the loss of his son, despite human surgeons not performing the surgery because they were high. Every character in the story has a counterpart who challenges the player's moral compass and constantly questions the player's behaviors. Alice is Kara's counterpart and will challenge the player's decisions to something immoral or bad, even if it's to protect Alice. North and Josh are Marcus's counterparts, and they both act as the angel and devil on Marcus's shoulders, with Josh wanting to push for a more peaceful approach in forgiving humans, and with North a more violent approach in getting revenge on humans. Hank is different, however. First of all, he's a human.
What would I say if I told you that? Hey, what would you say if I told you?
And he's one of the very few humans that we can interact with. Because Hank is a human, he suffers with very real human issues, and the player can properly empathize with him. Hank also has very polarizing views on androids, and unlike Alice, Josh, and North, which mainly remain as static characters, Hank is a human being with human thoughts, and depending on the path you take with Connor, Hank's mood, tone, opinions, and speech will change accordingly. As you'd expect, if you go full beat bop mode, Hank loses all hope for a bright future for himself and his community.
You opened my eyes, Connor. Made me realize it's hopeless.
He loses his will to go on and ends up committing suicide. However, if you show Hank that there is hope for humanity and that not all androids are bad, Hank becomes hopeful. He trusts you, and Hank ultimately learns that androids are important and deserve a spot in the world. Basically, Hank gains a new perspective on life and the android situation.
Well, maybe you did the right thing.
Hank is a very interesting character because he's a human. He makes choices and mistakes that Alice, Josh, and North would never make as androids. Hank is fully content with abandoning you, fighting you, going against what you believe, and he is completely capable of taking control of his own life, whether for the better or for the worse. Hank and Connor's differing opinions and personalities also conflict many times, and make not only for an interesting buddy cop noir, but also for a very interesting narrative in general. Because honestly, in my opinion, the idea of a laid-back old nihilistic police lieutenant working directly next to a driven, cold, persistent, perfect, calculated machine is pretty cool. Sometimes it's funny because Hank's flaws are always juxtaposed directly against Connor's perfections, and this is shown when Connor has to sober Hank up, when Hank struggles to catch up with Connor during the chase segments, and just in general when Connor is acting robotic and Hank is very visibly confused or awkward. This, however, also makes for many tense and heartwarming moments, such as when Hank is questioning what Connor really is at the climax of his story, or when Hank praises Connor for going against his programming and making a good choice. Hank and Connor also share a very father-son relationship, and it works especially well considering that Hank latches onto Connor emotionally a lot because of the loss of his son. Hank is also a more fleshed out character, and a multi-layered one which we learn more about slowly as the story progresses. Hank isn't as pushed as hard as Alice's abusive dad or Marcus's father-son relationship with Carl. At the beginning, we only know that Hank is a sarcastic, careless drunk who hates androids. So basically, he's an asshole. But we latch on to Hank because he has sort of a charm to him, and thanks to the wonderful acting of Clancy Brown, we feel that there is more to unravel with this guy that we just don't know. So, by the end of the story, we know that Hank is a hopeless, depressed, an alcoholic, a failed family man who cares deeply about others but pushes them away.
And twice the cholesterol level. You shouldn't eat that.
Everybody's gotta die of something.
He's sarcastic, he's funny, he's protective of the people he loves, he's incredibly good at his job, he has a really banger taste in music. And at the end, he's actually a pretty nice guy. But it all depends on how you use Connor. The main conclusion that can be drawn from all this is basically Connor acts as the player, not just something for the player of the game to control, but rather a shell or a vessel for the player to be directly immersed into the game, be in Connor's shoes. As stated previously in the video, I feel that the player can really connect with Connor due to the fact that his counterpart is a human being. Connor himself is the only character that has a software instability, and Connor's story has drastic fluctuations based on whatever choices you take because of the fact that Hank is a human, and there are no real restrictions to the decisions you make, nothing really anchoring you down, unlike Alice or North or Josh regarding Marcus and Kara. Along with just the fact that the player can feel like Connor, this feeling of connection with Connor, and the reason why I think he's the best character is also because of the soundtrack. It just feels like a really fitting soundtrack. It's a unique soundtrack with unique sounds that captures not only the machine and the human parts of Connor, but also captures the emotion of the situation and can somehow perfectly convey sadness, anger, intensity, all in one score by using very interesting dynamics and inventions by Nima Fakara, such as the Connor guitar, I think it was called, and the Minimoog Voyager, and the machine he made to create those tiki-tikis I was talking about earlier. Basically, to make a long story short, Connor is the best because he is, as much as I hate to admit it, relatable as fuck. Good night, everyone.